Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Monday, January the 13th. I'm Zach Ewing with Scott Rabelais and Koki Riley. Got a special edition of the LSU Sports Insider podcast today. LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson is here in the studio, and we're going to get to him in just a minute. And guys, I'm excited to hear what Jay has to say.
Yeah, it should be really, really interesting. This is a pretty big season for LSU coming up. 2 years removed from a national championship. Last year, the first half of the year was really rough. At one point, they were 3-12 in conference play and sit almost right around 500. And then they went on a roll, and they nearly won the SEC tournament. They made the NCAA tournament with ease after weeks of being like, are they going to get in? Are they not going to get in? And then they came really 2 outs away from not just making the super regional, but potentially getting to Omaha, because they would have been home for a super regional if they had just won that last game.
And they were a team nobody wanted to play at
that point, because they had finally gotten on a roll and lived up to the potential that they had heading into the year. So they're heading into a really interesting season, especially with so many new pieces, especially on the pitching staff.
Always a lot of interest in LSU baseball, but I think this year there's a lot of anticipation. They're ranked very highly, and we've seen one of the preseason polls in a very tough conference, of course. But I think the anticipation for this season is really ramped up again because of the new players coming in. Going to be lots to talk about with Jay, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So their season starts February the 14th, so we're just about exactly a month away, and we're going to bring on Jay Johnson, talk to him about that right after this break. First, I want to let you know that our show is brought to you by the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge, and it's your go-to for game day or any day. Take a quick break, stick with us, and we'll be back with LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson right after this.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional healthcare for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You give me love.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. We're super excited now to be joined by LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson, joining us here in studio. Jay, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Good to be with you guys.
Absolutely. And so just kind of a wide-ranging conversation here. We got, a month before the season starts about? So you're counting down the days, I'm sure. How did the offseason treat you? And I know you've said before that baseball is your life, baseball is your hobby, it's everything. But what'd you do with yourself during the offseason?
Yeah, it's been very busy. And going back to the end of 2024, I was very proud of our team, how we competed in the NCAA tournament. Tough loss to North Carolina. I've been doing this a long time, and other than losing the national championship game in 2016, one of the most difficult losses of my career, because I was very proud of how that team responded to some adversity early in SEC play and finished, and I really believed we were playing about as good as anybody in the country, by the end of the season. And so that was tough. Took me a little bit to get over that. But nowadays, the nature of college baseball, the impact of the transfer portal, and the impact of the Major League Draft, the summer is one of the most intense times. And so we had a lot of work to do. When you think about, we've had 22 players drafted the last 2 years that have signed for over $32 million. There was going to come a point where we were going to have a pretty heavy roster overhaul. So most of the summer was putting together this team, via the transfer portal. And then the draft, we were very fortunate to get, a lot of our good high school recruits through the draft. We did lose a few. So then you kind of have the team, and then you're immediately on to the fall, with starting school relatively early here at LSU. And recruiting for future classes, and then building a foundation, for this year's team. And I thought it was a very productive fall in terms of what we were able to accomplish and setting a good foundation that will move us into the new year. And so, the holidays, that's about the only time in this job you have a little bit of a normal life. So enjoyed that and turn the corner, ready to go.
You bury yourself in your work, and all of a sudden that loss seems farther and farther away, and now you can turn the page. You talked about overhauling the roster, and I know these guys have some questions too, but you wound up with one of the best transfer classes in America, not to mention the freshmen that you mentioned. So of those newcomers, who should fans kind of look for to make an instant impact?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them. And, kind of going through this deal, my job is always assessing and trying to push us forward. And like I said, we did win 43 games last year. Other than winning the national championship the year before, that's the most wins an LSU team has had since 2017. So there's some good building with the returning players. There's not a high number of them, but a lot of them played a lot last year and have kind of gone through, and a number of them have gone through, hey, the best of the best win the national title last year, some difficulty and then overcoming. So the returning players, I think, give us a good foundation, to start with. As far as the new players, there's several. I don't really want to leave anybody out, but we're replacing 10 of our top 12 pitchers, in terms of impact last year. So very excited about some of those newcomers. Probably the best pitcher in the fall was Connor Ware, a junior college transfer left-hander from Pearl River in Mississippi. And then obviously we were able to get some really good freshmen, through the draft. When you talk about William Schmidt, local product, could have been drafted in the first round, but decided he wanted to play baseball at LSU. And very happy that he decided to do that, and proud of him, because there's a lot more things to this life than money, and he had to postpone, getting a lot of money to come here. And we're very lucky to have William, another freshman, Kason Evans from Houston, Texas, up to 99 miles an hour with the fastball in the fall with a really good changeup. Very good competitive character. His dad was his high school baseball coach, grew up in a really good family. Was a big recruiting win for us a couple years ago when he committed. Very excited about Kason. Maverick Rizzi from Massachusetts, big, tall righty. I'm keeping to my promise. We're not going to recruit any pitchers that look like me from a size standpoint. And he's looking pretty good up there at 6'9". Cooper Williams, another freshman left-hander from Texas that we're excited about. And then, the transfer portal, I think last year we had 9 pitchers sign a pro contract, which I believe was an SEC record, for the 2024 pitching staff. That's a lot to replace. And so we needed to go get some experienced guys as well. Zach Cowan from Wofford, who we were preparing for in the NCAA tournament, had a great season last year at Wofford. Excited about him. Jacob Myers, local product, pitched at Nichols the last 2 years. I think he was the Southland Pitcher of the Year a couple years ago as a freshman. Chandler Dorsey, South Florida, Connor Binge, Dallas Baptist. And I get nervous, when you ask me those questions, because there's a lot of guys I feel like I'm leaving out, and some good returners, like I mentioned, with Kate Anderson, Gavin Guidry. So Chase Shore is back from injury. So I'm excited what Coach Yeski has to work with the pitching staff.
We'll apologize in advance to anybody you happen to have left out. Wait,
yeah, thank you, because it's not intentional, for sure.
Jay, just talking about bringing all these newcomers, players you lost, and everything. The way you had to construct this roster, the way you have to, seems like you have to construct rosters now in this current NIL transfer portal era. Was this, you think, in any way unique to the team that you had to, the roster you had to fill this year, or do you think this is the new norm? And how do you deal with it?
It's a good question. My decisions are always made on what's best for LSU baseball. Mm-hmm. There's no one underlying thing that it has to be a certain way. By preference, I like what we were able to do the first couple years, where it was about maybe 5 guys from the transfer portal, and then build off a good foundation from what you have within. There's a lot of dynamics in recruiting, taking over a program like I could get into, but the baseline is what does our program need to be successful? And because of the number of departures, significant departures to professional baseball, after 2023, in my opinion, one of the greatest college baseball teams of all time, 13 players drafted, not just an LSU record, an SEC record. Last year, 9 pitchers moving to pro baseball, another SEC record. We just needed more volume in terms of what we were doing. So I don't think it's going to be the new norm. I don't want it to be the new norm. I would really like to continue to build our program through players that we bring in as freshmen and develop them. You know, I've always viewed, if you ask me what I feel like one of my strengths is developing a program, you know, and getting players better each year. That second year they really make a jump. That third year, you know, they're playing their best and they're ready to move on to professional baseball. Or that senior really wants to come back and he's been with you for 4 years. And I think Josh Pearson is like the only 4-year player for us this year. Yeah. So times are changing. There's a lot of things that are different. For me, it's like what's best. And this year we just had to hustle a little more, and really mainly because a lot of good players have moved on from here from the last 2 years and winning 97 games.
But you guys also added a bunch of names on the hitting side, and when it came to the portal as well. I think when we spoke on Tuesday, I think you mentioned that there are up to 15 guys you could play in a game, and the game could be competitive. It's not just a blowout where you're putting guys in and out. And it creates just more competition within the team. It's not just a depth thing. So in terms of some of those spots on the roster, third base, catcher, how have those sort of shaken out from what you saw in the fall? How have those positions in particular sort of shaken out for you so far?
Yeah, I think I'll start with catcher because they touch the ball every pitch on defense, or most pitches, you know, the ones that aren't put in play. We have 0 innings returning that caught for us last year. You know, when you look at, you know, Alex Milazzo moving on, Hayden Travinsky moving on. So it's basically a start over from behind the plate. And, you know, when you talk about the summertime, evaluating where we were going to be, you know, Kate Arambidi is a freshman that I'm really excited about. You know, it was really important that we got him through the professional draft. And I think he's got a chance to be a great player at LSU for 3 years. Love the ability, along with the character, the makeup, the work ethic. He'll develop into a really good player, you know, at LSU. Luis Hernandez transferred from Indiana State, hit 23 home runs last year at Indiana State, which is a great program. Their coach took the job at South Florida, I believe, and so he decided to go in the transfer portal. And he's a much better catcher than we anticipated. And that was a big lift. I think he's ready to go and ready to play and compete at our level behind the plate, on top of being a really good hitter as well. So those 2 guys on the catching front were probably the best in the fall. Blaze Priester led our teams in home runs. You know, he'll have some at-bats at the DH position and also has a lot of ability. He can throw really, really well and has some good catching skill. So you're probably looking at those 3 guys. It's not sorted out, maybe the order, you know, just yet. I'd see all 3 of them, you know, getting an opportunity, which, you know, we've kind of done that the last couple years where we've played 3 catchers. In terms of third base, kind of to still be sorted out. We are going to move Stephen Milam over to the left side of the infield, and kind of the leaders on the left side of the infield are Stephen and Michael Braswell, who played shortstop last year. Some of the style of pitching that we have, we feel like there'll be more balls in play on the left side than maybe at any point since I've been the coach here. And with some of the strengths of the pitching staff, I believe Steven is the best infielder on our team, and I want him to handle the ball a lot.
And just to sort of follow up on that last point, I thought was really interesting. Why do you think there may be a lot of balls in play on the left side of the infield?
Just the style of pitchers, and maybe if you look at a pitcher, you know, where does their contact, where does it end up happening, or what's the result of balls put in play? And we don't have a huge sample size because we have a lot of guys pitching in games for the first time, but the nature of their stuff lends itself to left side ground balls. And again, it's a little unique. It's kind of like a basketball style deal. Like you put your best defender on the guy that shoots a lot. So I've always thought, why wouldn't you put one of your better defenders where they're going to hit the ball a lot? And so I have a lot of confidence in Steven as a defender. I have a lot of confidence in Michael as a defender. And so I'm excited about seeing how that goes. Now, we didn't get the sample size in the fall that I would have liked to, because Steven basically missed about half the fall with both injury and illness. But he's ready to go now. Looks great. And I'm excited to get into practice and see how that kind of shakes itself out.
I got to ask you about go back to some of your freshmen newcomers. William Schmidt, obviously a local kid, and it just, if people follow sports here as they do follow baseball, the enormous talent, and if you believe the internet, you'll sign him to like $100 million NIL deal, right?
That's not true.
I'm totally joking. Not putting you on the spot, but obviously a player like him. People familiar with his career so far, as you said, he could have easily gone to the major league draft. Yeah. How do you want to temper expectations for him? Because obviously freshmen can come and contribute right away, but everyone's different.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points as you brought up. The first one that I would say, like the story with him coming here, is a real feel-good story for me, not just to have a talent of William on LSU's roster, but you're talking about a kid that went to bed in purple and gold pajamas as a little kid. You're talking about a guy that lives like a quarter of a mile from the pitcher's mound at the stadium, and the bottom line is he just really wanted to do this. He wanted to be an LSU Tiger. And I mean, the story of him deciding to come here, pull his name out of the draft, we could talk forever about that. Now moving forward, he's ready to pitch right now. Like he has the capabilities right now to help LSU win in 2025, and I'm super excited about that. I think one of the things I appreciate about William is his ability to focus and his competitive character while he's on the mound. He doesn't seem to be easily distracted while he's competing, and that's the first bar that you kind of have to get over. The second is the talent, and it's a fastball that's, I think been up to 97 or 98 even at times. Excellent breaking ball. Changeup is a pitch that we had way underrated because he didn't throw it a lot in high school, because if you throw a changeup in high school, you're actually doing a hitter a favor. Now, the totality of the 36 months or 3 years that we're have him, I will always try to do the best for. Yes, we are going to use the player to help LSU win, and he certainly wants to do that, but this guy's going to pitch in professional baseball for a long time. So how we kind of segment those 3 years, I'm paying attention to. And so he'll be at the front of this thing. And sometimes, as you guys know, the front of this thing for me is putting one of your better pitchers towards the end of the game. When you have a lead against a good offense or a good lineup, maybe that helps us with his pitch count over time. But there's going to be a time where he's taking the ball on the weekend and going like, all right, dude, give us your best for 100 pitches. And he'll be able to do that really well, I think.
It's fascinating to hear you bring these points up, both with how to manage the player and how to manage, say, your infield defense. There's going to be a time when these fans are sitting on the couch in April and saying, well, why did they do that? I guarantee you he's thought about it more than you have.
Well, you know what is great about that? I have no problem with that. It actually makes this like the best job in the country.
Sure.
As long as they continue to show up and stand on their feet and make the box loud, and the great home environment that it is. And it's so awesome. I don't go out to eat a lot during the spring for sure. Just I'm in my office all the time. Uber Eats business has definitely increased since I showed up in.
How do we get points
in Baton Rouge? I don't even know how that works.
What's the go-to order there for Uber Eats?
It's tough. I'll mix it up. I love Chipotle. Okay. It's just a quick and easy, and you can kind of fake like you're being healthy a little bit.
Are we getting guac?
Definitely, of course.
Get the guac.
It's from California.
Yeah. Sure. Well, as Coach Johnson builds his team, reminder, Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is also building their team. You can join them. They're committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today for a job at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Coach, as you look at your pitching rotation, as you mentioned with William, and your lineup and things like that and competitions, every season's different. What is the ideal timeline for tinkering and then settling on something for once you get deep into SEC play?
Yeah, I think I never love the word tinkering, because to me it's like it's an experimentation. Like some of that happens in training and practice, but when we set it out for a game, every decision is to win the game. And we want to win games while we're figuring out our best team. So there's always intentionality behind it, however I do it. The old Coach Bertman line, who's my hero and now obviously one of my mentors and become one of my best friends. Like, he had this saying, he wanted to have his team lined up by tax day. I think kind of a mode I've worked under is the age group of young males in this generation that I'm coaching. A lot of times things are day to day. And so best assessing who's in the right position to be at their best to help the team win. Sometimes things change a little bit. And I'll give you an example of that in 2023. Jared Jones, who in my opinion is the highlight player for the team this year, 28 homers last year, decided to return. And as a draft eligible sophomore last year, huge lift for our team. He hit .301, hit 14 home runs as a freshman in the SEC. Took some really good at-bats, was able to walk against some really of the high-end pitchers, did a good job at first base. But kind of for that team, once Trey Morgan was healthy enough again to come back into first base, we had enough firepower with, Dylan, with Tommy, with Cade Beloso, with Dugas. It was better for us to make sure Trey was at first base, Beloso was the DH, and Josh Pearson, good defensive outfielder that, good situational hitter who I'm excited to have back again this year. So you're kind of always looking at what's best for the team right then and there. And Jared didn't do anything wrong at all. I mean, he had a phenomenal. I think he was a freshman All-American, even though he wasn't in the lineup on a regular basis in the postseason. So a lot of it is the totality of the parts and what you need. I'll give you another example. Ben Napolt, who's actually on our staff as a graduate assistant coach, this year. Really good defensive infielder. We had a game, I believe we were playing Lamar at home, and you talk about hitting ground balls to the left side. Like, these guys hit everything hard on the ground to the left side. We started him at third base that game, and I think Tommy was still dealing with the shoulder thing. He was only able to DH, and he made like 10 plays that night. So a lot of it is day to day. I think it does help if you can kind of get to a pretty solid framework like we were able to do in the postseason in 23. But at LSU, we're going to have some depth, and it's my job to put players in position to be successful. So it doesn't always look the same every game.
I think speaking of depth and roles with your pitching staff in particular, you still have to sort of pick out guys who you think could maybe get into some of those roles, right? Because you have to build up innings with pitchers.
100%.
This is a health thing. So you targeted, when we spoke on Tuesday, you targeted 7-8 guys who could potentially be in those pitching roles. How important was it to have a variety of different guys, whether it's a Cowan and an Anderson and someone else, for example, making sure you had different types of guys who could go multiple innings within that, within those 7 to 8 guys?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think in terms of building a number of guys up, you can work however you need to from that point. Guys can start if their pitch counts build up. They could, piggyback on the back end of a game and give you like 3 or 4 innings and continue to keep their pitch count up if you ever did want to start them. I think it's easier to pull guys down from there to where they can, maybe pitch twice in a week or twice in a weekend if their pitch counts build up. So that's kind of the strategy behind it. And then there's some other guys I think are going to be really effective for our team that we're actually going to train as twice a week, 1 inning type guys, or twice a weekend, 1 inning type guys as we prepare for the season. And I'm excited about that element. In terms of the variability and versatility, my belief, hitting is about seeing the ball and timing and pitch selection, obviously. Pitching is about disrupting a hitter's ability to see the ball and be on time. And so the more variability you can have in arm slots, types of pitches, ability to change speeds, throw at the top and the bottom of the zone, outer half, inner half of the plate, you can make it much more difficult on offense. As I look at the totality of the pitching staff, I do think this staff, it's talented, but it also has some good variability where we might be able to utilize that to make it a little more difficult on some offenses.
And you mentioned it briefly earlier, but Cooper Williams, I think, is pretty important when it comes to that variability stuff because, quite frankly, you guys don't have as many left-handed pitchers on the roster as you had last season, and he's he's going to play a role, some sort of role on this team because he's one of the few lefties that you have, but he's just a freshman. So how important is he to maybe the success of just this season?
Yeah, I think he's going to be very successful this year, and I think he'll be a headline pitcher in our program over the totality of the 3 years here. And very excited to get Cooper kind of late in the recruiting process due to coaching change at another school. And so very excited about that, very excited about him. I think he does create really good deception in terms of what he does, how he throws, really good at changing speeds. So I think he will be important to what we're doing. I think, yes, there's less volume on the left-handed side, but I do think one unique part about this pitching staff is we have some very specific righties that are really good at getting left-handed hitters out. And you can kind of utilize those guys as de facto matchup guys.
Jay, obviously, this has been the year of big change in the SEC this academic year with Texas and Oklahoma joining the league. And you guys are going to both of those places this season, right? We were talking before the game. I don't know if LSU's ever been to Oklahoma for a regular season series ever. I know they've been to Texas a bunch of times, but your thoughts on what they bring to the league and how it changes, and the SEC decided to stick with a 30-game schedule, so that means you're not going to face 1/3 of the league every year. Is that still a reasonably good way to decide the regular season champion? Is there any room to change that? Anything you'd like to see change?
Well, first off, just the league in general, the schedule. Regardless of who you play, you're playing 30 very difficult games. And I don't want to sound like the homer guy for the conference or like I'm on the SEC network or anything like that. We have the best league in baseball.
Well, no, you look at the rankings.
I don't think you can argue that.
By miles. By miles.
Yeah.
I mean, I've kind of referred to it. I probably said this to you, Koki. Like, our league right now is the moon, relative to the rest of the country. And I've coached at some great places where there's been great baseball played, where maybe we'd had success against SEC teams. We won 2 super regionals at Arizona against SEC teams. But doing it in one weekend, a lot different than doing it 10 weekends in a row and then going to Hoover. Way different story. And I think with the way things have changed in college athletics, our league is the one league that has poured resources into baseball and continued to make it a priority. Thus, I mean, I had to do one of those preseason polls, and you're trying to take a stab at like a 16-team conference standing, and I'm going like, wait a minute, there's probably like 13 or 14 of these teams can win the national championship this year. So that tells you everything that you need to know. In regards to Oklahoma and Texas, it happened like I think right after I took the job here that it has announced that they were coming in. Seems to have gotten here fast. I think Oklahoma was the Big 12 champion last year. I know they hosted a regional last year. They have a tremendous pitching staff. I know they've talked about making improvements to their ballpark and are investing in baseball at the way everybody in the SEC is. They're recruiting at a really high level right now for like future years and future classes. So I think they're going to be great. Texas they've been to Omaha a billion times. Beautiful ballpark. They're now in the state where there's probably the most, players, probably tied for first with that in Florida, where the most good players come from in one particular state. They've been good forever. There's no reason to think that they won't continue to be a great program. And you know what? Like, bring it on. Like, it sounds great. And what I mean by that is like, it's 2 more teams on top of all the other great teams that are already in there. I get asked like about who do you play in this team or that team. And it's like, man, I don't even know that there's really a difference. I don't think we have a natural rival per se at LSU. I just have so much respect for how the SEC looks at baseball and all the schools in the league look at baseball, and added 2 great programs like that. It only makes us better. I think the only thing I pay attention to, or really the only thing I care about, is we get as many bids into the NCAA tournament as possible. Like if we have 16 teams of this caliber, the 12 has to be the minimum of teams in our league that are playing postseason
I
baseball.
think last year was the record at 11.
It
right?
was. That's correct.
So it's slowly getting up to that number.
The SEC in softball has put every team in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah,
It's
and
not
probably
impossible.
performed well.
Yeah, it's not impossible to do so. You're watching the LSU Sports Insider podcast. We're joined by LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson today. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. We owe you a quick break. We're going to conclude our conversation with LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson right after this.
Football fans, with the Caesars Sportsbook app, you can be in the game all the time. Seeking instant action? Quick Picks offers you the most popular games and markets, already built for you and ready to bet. Experience the thrill when you stack your bets to create a super parlay. Build bets for your favorite teams and players across multiple games. This season, don't just watch the game. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience the game like never before.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit ClassicIndustrial.com for more information.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Continuing our conversation with LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson. Jay, a perfect game preseason poll, I think, was the first one, came out yesterday. LSU's number 2. I assume you're like most coaches and don't care a whole lot about those rankings and sorts of things like that. But my question is, internally and maybe even personally, do you feel the difference in expectations from year to year? I know you don't want to shortchange any team and say that team's not capable of something, but when expectations are high, do you feel that?
You know, I think the rankings thing, and I learned this a long time ago, like several coaching stops ago, those are only like validation of things that happened positively in the past. You know, I mentioned we won 97 games in the last 2 years. That's a lot of games. There's a national championship in there. 43-win season. And to do that and to accomplish that, there has to be some element of good players, in your program, which we have, that are returning. Jared Jones, Stephen Milam, Michael Braswell, Josh Pearson, Jake Brown, Ashton Larson, Kate Anderson, Gavin Guidry. Like, that's not a high number of players, but those guys have all contributed, so that's how those rankings happen. Or maybe you recruited well, which I believe that we did when you're bringing in freshmen like William Schmidt, like Derek Curiel, like transfers like Daniel Dickinson or Luis Hernandez or Chris Stanfield. So that's all that's a reflection of. It actually has nothing to do with what happens on the field. And so, like, when we have our first team meeting, coming up here in a couple of days, we'll talk about attacking what is relevant, which is how we prepare, how we train, how we play. What is irrelevant is what anybody else says about you, including like a ranking thing. Now, do we use some of it externally? Sure. And you have to do that for recruiting and continuing to promote your program as one of the best places to play in college baseball, which I believe that it is. But yeah, I haven't really had a hard time like getting the attention of our players on focusing on what really matters. I think it's a different world now when they look and live on the internet as much as they do. You cannot skip that step of making sure that the focus is in the right place.
Yeah, 100%. I know, Rab, you were asking too about some changes we may see this year.
Yeah, the Alex box, looks pretty much the same, but y'all didn't make a significant change. You moved the bullpen behind the right field wall,
yes.
Correct? Your bullpen. Now the visitors' bullpen is in the same place, right?
It's in the same place, but it's out of play now.
Okay.
It's there's a net in front of it.
Okay. Is this something you were wanting to do since you got here?
I actually had nothing to do with any of this. I leave those things to people that are far smarter than me. I know there's never been more of an important time to create revenue in college sports than right now. And we have to be able to do that here. And I think there was some thoughts from our administration that those luxury seats, which it looks like they're going to be pretty cool, to be honest with you. I think fans are really going to enjoy that, which is awesome.
Oh, the baseline.
Our fans are great. So it's going to help create additional revenue, give a really good ballpark experience for those people. As far as how it affects the game, there's significantly less foul territory. So there's going to be some foul balls that would have been caught, maybe, per se. We lost a game on the last play to Auburn my first year here, which player actually got hurt. So I think getting the bullpen off the field is a good thing from like a safety perspective. But I wish the fences were like that then, because the ball would have been a foul ball. Maybe we would have got the game-winning hit on the next pitch.
Still, Jay, you still
yeah, it's not like I hadn't thought about it. Like that was the Game 7 of the SEC. And, I think we might have even finished in second in the West by one game or something like that, or third, whatever. And it was probably the difference between hosting a regional that year and not, because I believe Auburn hosted, yet we had finished ahead of them in the standings, but they'd beat us in the series. So no, I hadn't given any thought to it.
You brought up a sore subject, apparently.
Yeah.
You also mentioned during our break that the double first base is going to be a permanent fixture this year, which I think we saw in the NCAA regionals last year. You said you just tell me what the rule is. You don't have a preference either way.
I think I'm all for player safety, and I think it avoids collisions. But now, as we're talking about it, I had this thought: it should eliminate a lot of runners lane interference calls, which we had one work for us in the national championship game in the first inning in 2023. But more often than not, I've had that play work against me and our teams. So I'm happy to reduce the chances of runner's lane interference and it affecting like a defensive throw. Like we had a tough loss at Alabama last year on a very controversial call, and there was basically an interpretation. And so I'm happy for that. I think the safety thing's the first thing, and maybe reduce the number of those plays.
And we've talked a lot about pitching versatility today, but in terms of the lineup, obviously I mentioned that you guys have a much deeper lineup, and part of that's because you have more left-handed hitting in terms of guys who you could definitely see starting at any moment as left-handed hitters. How important was that for you this offseason to sort of just add more versatility when it came to handedness with the lineup?
It's huge deal. And I knew it kind of going into last year, that could potentially be a little bit of an issue. I didn't think power would be or was an issue. It wasn't. We hit a lot of home runs in 2024. But I felt like two things. Number one, we were too right-handed, and I think we were too power over hit. And I've prided my whole career on developing great offensive teams that can win any type of game, any type of way. Big park, small park, wind blowing in, wind blowing out, day game, night game, type of pitcher you're facing, pitcher's duel, slugfest. And I think we added some left-handed bats that will help us have balance in the order, make pitchers use all their pitches, pitch to both sides of the plate, create pinch hitting opportunities, kind of like you had mentioned, Koki. We talked about, you might see us use 15 players in one game, whether it's pinch hit, pinch run, defensive replace. So I'm excited about that. And, the part of that that's going to be important is players embracing what the team needs them to do that day. And, that's uncommon nowadays for players to think outside of themselves. And I think we've done a good job developing good team culture here, but we're going to have to really do that this year if we want to be the best that we can be.
As opposed to, just curiously, as opposed to 5 or 10 years ago, has it been harder to get that sort of buy-in now, given not just social media, but NIL and all the money that's sort of at stake for these players? Is it harder to get that buy-in now than it was, say, 10 years ago? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know that the NIL or money or any of those things impact that. I think, our players it's not their fault. They're growing up in a very like self-absorbed world, kind of like this look at me type culture. And, what I do know about young people is self-acceptance is really important. They want to know that they have value to your team. And my dad was a legendary high school coach in a couple different sports. And one thing that he taught me, as a kid and just observing, he had an unbelievable way of making everybody feel important to what the team was doing. And so we have to do a good job of that as coaches. I think, is it more work? I think what you can't do is you can't just assume everybody's going to be on page with the message of the team, or they understand what being a great teammate is, or being selfless is. And then you have it going really good when the players can kind of confront each other on the behaviors like being selfless that you need and demand that everybody's going to do that. Now, it takes really good leadership to have that amongst the players, and that's a necessity if you want to have an elite team.
Did you feel like that sort of grew as last year went on and you guys sort of found more success and found a rhythm in terms of not just who you're playing, but just heck winning games?
I think so. I do think so. I remember, being, kind of distraught when we lost because I felt like we'd kind of broken through a barrier of some of those things, and they were giving more of themselves into the team and, really wanted to go like, man, we took on this hellacious stretch, the national champion on the road, the number one team in the country in Arkansas on the road, Florida, who we had just played for the national title, Vanderbilt, probably the best program over the last 10 to 15 years, all in a row. Like nobody does that, not even in our league. And we took it on the chin. We had to grow up. I think there was some serious growth. We did. And we took probably the best non-SEC team in the country to the absolute. It took everything North Carolina had to beat us. And so, seeing all that growth, winning 22 of the last 28 games or whatever it was, like had we could have gotten to Omaha and put ourselves in position again, that would have been something that would have been extraordinary. Still very proud of that, even though the result didn't quite get to where we wanted it to be.
That's not a good place to end and kind of whet your appetite for the season to come. I don't know what is. We need to get some baseball weather in here. We need to get some weekend nights out at the box. Jay Johnson, LSU baseball coach, we appreciate you joining us and look forward to another season following the Tigers.
Thank you. Appreciate the coverage that you guys give our team.
Absolutely. Want to let you know before we go, today's show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. All right. Our producer today was Alex Lee. He's Scott Rabley, Koki Riley, and our guest, of course, LSU baseball coach Jay Johnson. I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching the LSU Sports Insider.